Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate all the support I've been getting over these videos, and I know a lot of you are begging for more, so here I am, and I hope to do a lot more in the future. I'll have a website up soon, and I'll let you all know about it. So I want to do a bit of a COVID update today. I have some numbers and percentages for you coming up, and a lot of what I call vital information. And frankly, I'm very upset at what I'm seeing happening to our country. Extremely upset and unnerved by the actions that a lot of governors and mayors are taking across this country. It seems to me that they're using this event called COVID, and I've spoken to you all about events. Events are put on, are produced to create a result, and the result is you having less freedom, you having less money, you having less of your God-given constitutional rights. There's tremendous hypocrisy here, and these governors and mayors that I'm talking about claim that they're doing it for your health. That is a lie. They're not doing it for your health. They're doing it for one reason only. This is all about power and control. All of it. The hypocrisy is beyond belief. You have to stay in your house. You have to destroy your business for your supposed safety. But we'll take away your police force. We'll tell the cops not to arrest villains. We'll flood your city with dangerous criminals. We'll force you to hamper your breathing. Literally, force you to wear a mask that makes you breathe in your bodily waste. Will forbid you to visit your parents and your grandparents in nursing homes and hospitals, and will close all your gyms. Is this for your health? Doesn't sound like it to me at all. I don't hear one thing that the government has told us to do that will increase your health. Of course, liquor stores are open, abortion clinics are open, but you can't open your small business. It's all curious to me. It's not about your safety at all. Don't believe it for a second. It's only about control and power, them getting their power back. Them, what I mean is the globalists. There is an organization that's existed for many, many years that's looking to dominate the entire world, that's looking to create a one world government. There's more than enough evidence about that, and these are the forces that are actively expediting the destruction of the United States right now, right before your eyes. Verify what you've been told, verify what you believe, verify why you believe it, and try to see the big picture, okay? Mark Twain said, in the beginning of a change, the patriot is a scarce man, and brave and hated and scorned. When his cause succeeds, the timid join him, for then it costs nothing to be a patriot. President Kennedy said, there exists in this country a plot to enslave every man, woman, and child, and before I leave this high and noble office, I intend to expose this plot. That was our President Kennedy, and you know what happened to President Kennedy. And here's a couple interesting quotes about globalism. Congressman Larry McDonald in 1976 said the drive of the Rockefellers, that's one of the rich ruling families of the globalists, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Warburgs, the DuPonts. These are the ultra-rich families that are out to create a one-world government. The drive of the Rockefellers and their allies is to create a one-world government combining super-capitalism and communism under the same tent, all under their control. Do I mean conspiracy? Yes, I do. Am I convinced there is such a plot, international in scope, generations old in planning, and incredibly evil in intent? Yes, that's Congressman Larry McDonald. He was killed in an airline crash that was supposedly shot down by the Soviets in 1976. I'm going to read you one more quote from an actual Rockefeller, and this has to do with the media. And I find it incredibly interesting, and I imagine you will too. And hopefully you'll stop trusting your media sources and start trusting yourself and use your own mind. Quote from David Rockefeller. He was the founder of the Trilateral Commission. We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings, respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. This was in 1991. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity during those years. But the work is now much more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries. End quote. That's David Rockefeller, founder of the Trilateral Commission, in an address to the meeting of the Trilateral Commission in June 1991. Trilateral Commission is a seditious group of internationalists that decide what policies will be made here in the United States. Not much different than the Council on Foreign Relations, which also is an anti-constitutional, seditious organization as well. And most presidents in the past century have been a part of the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission. In fact, it's very rare you get a president that's not a member of those groups. We have a president that's not a member right now. They don't like him very much. About 1 to 2%, about 1 to 0.2% of people who supposedly have the virus die. Most all of them have other medical problems and other issues. The average age of death is, I believe, around 78 right now. Less than 0.5% of the people who get this virus supposedly die. We are being played by those who want to destroy America. This is how you destroy a nation from within, and in very short order. Divide and conquer. Bring up any and all racial incidents and exaggerate and propagandize the stories and the number of times it happens. The race card is something the media has been playing for many, many times, and they always are out to inflame the situation. And they claim America is a racist country. It's one of the least racist countries ever known to man. And I'm going to be doing a video soon about that. And you'll see exactly what I mean. Scare people with a fake disease, a fake virus, force them to wear masks and place them in quarantine. I've said this before, quarantine is for sick people. When somebody's sick, you put them in quarantine so they don't infect others, supposedly. You don't quarantine healthy people. This is the first time in human history where healthy people are being quarantined. Don't stand for it. Count the number of dead every second of every day in every newscast and every news headline. If you turn to CNN and MSNBC, you will constantly see the number of deaths and the number of new cases. Continually repeat the word epidemic and pandemic, and continually sell the gloom and doom. Again, 99 and 0.8 of the people who supposedly get this virus recover. Under this unbelievable chain of events, 35 million people have become unemployed. Remember, right before this was happening in March of 2020, America was experiencing an incredible economic boom. This didn't happen for no reason. They've removed our entertainment. They've prohibited any kind of recreation. They've closed parks, gyms, bars, restaurants, sports. People get arrested if they dare to open their business. That's happening here in America. People who are going to open up their business are getting arrested. It happened to a gym owner in New Jersey just recently. You got to think about this. Our founding fathers knew about epidemics, real epidemics that actually killed people, that actually were epidemics. They understood that rapacious governments and tyrannical leaders would use the fear of dis-ease as a way to control people. So nowhere in the Constitution does it say your rights are guaranteed by the government and your government must protect your rights unless there's a virus, unless there's illness, unless there's an epidemic. They don't say that. There's a reason they don't say that. So just know this. There is no law that says that you have to stay in your house. There is no law that says that you cannot open your business. Remember that. No dating, no touching, isolate people, dehumanize them, close temples and churches, prohibit worship, create a vacuum, and let depression, anxiety, hopelessness, and desperation set in. Ignite hatred and civil unrest. Have those billionaires have those billionaires in America who pay for violent mobs to destroy cities and murder our citizens. Have them do that repeatedly, over and over again. Yes, these are paid agitators that you see on the streets. Then blame it on everybody else. Of course, there are people who really are sincere in their protests and want to do peaceful protests, but those are not the people who are burning down buildings. Those are not the people who are looting buildings, are looting businesses. Those are not the people who are murdering people on the street. These are paid agitators, and you might ask yourself, who's paying them, and why are they paying them, and what is the end? Undermine the law, riot, loot, create havoc, attack law enforcement, tell government to order a stand down, rescind the need for bail, let violent prisoners on the street, and condemn American citizens who try to protect themselves. I've seen at least 3 or 4 incidents where citizens who are being attacked are trying to protect themselves with guns, and they're being criminalized by the media, saying that they did something wrong. They were oppressing somebody's rights while somebody's breaking into their house or while somebody's trying to destroy their business. Unbelievable. Then, on top of all of this, defund the law. Defund law enforcement, I should say. Defund law enforcement and abolish the police. Can you imagine this? Can you imagine if 2 years ago somebody said, hey, you know what, let's get rid of the police. Or a year ago, that's a crazy idea. And you know who's going to suffer the most from that? Poor people will suffer the most. That's right. The people who want to defund the police, they all live in really nice neighborhoods. Not one person who says defund the police is living in a neighborhood that's riddled with crime. This is simply an attempted overthrow of our country. And our country, it does stand for freedom. Is our country without fault? Absolutely not. But this country was built on freedom and will only remain a great country if all our freedoms are exercised and fought for. We must regain all the freedoms we lost in the past decades and stamp out all coming threats to our God-given rights. Remember, this is not about your health. This is about control. I find it odd that so many people have lost their jobs. Very, very few government workers have lost their jobs. If this really was about health, I think they would have lost their jobs too. I continually call the CDC and ask for the paper that shows that SARS-CoV-2, the supposed new virus, causes COVID-19 disease. That paper still doesn't exist. You can call yourself. See if that paper exists. That paper doesn't exist. So there's zero evidence that there's a new virus that causes disease. I haven't seen it. In New York State and New York City, we were told that what we must do once this started was that we must flatten the curve. We must make sure our hospitals are not overrun. And once we flatten the curve, everything will be fine. The lockdowns will be over, and we can relax. Well, the curve has been completely and utterly flattened. It couldn't be any flatter now. It's as flat as a pancake, and there's no hospital in danger of being overwhelmed. In fact, at the height of this so-called epidemic, right here in the middle of it, at the epicenter, I live in New York City. I went to the hospitals that were supposedly overrun. I stood there for hours, day after day after day. I took videos. I'll post them soon. Uh, I couldn't believe not only were the emergency rooms not crowded, they were empty. I mean, empty. I barely saw one patient. And I'm talking, I went at least 7 or 8 days to these hospitals during the peak, right here in Manhattan. I remember the New York Times wrote an article and said there was a tsunami of patients at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. The next day I went, and it was absolutely empty. 0 people there. I find that very hard to believe. There were also a lot of other citizen journalists with their phones around the country in supposed hotspots or epicenters that showed the exact same thing. I'd like you to look that up for yourself. Again, don't take my word for anything, but please verify what you're being told. Again, the original reason for these draconian measures was to flatten the curve. Well, we flattened the curve, okay? And like I said, there was no hospitals that ever came close to being overrun. Now we're going to harass citizens, according to Mayor de Blasio, that want to come to New York using the police to stop law-abiding citizens and threaten them with $10,000 fines if they don't quarantine for 14 days once they come to New York City. I don't know, if your city is in a financial disaster, I think that's a really bad idea, unless, of course, you hate your citizens, unless, of course, you hate small business owners, which is actually the lifeblood of America. Small business owners. Never before were small business owners doing better than the beginning of March 2020. It's hard to imagine how much these leaders hate the citizens they preside over. I wonder if Americans will continue to vote for the sadistic, power-hungry American haters. Just remember this. Liquor stores are open. Abortion centers are open. Home Depot's open. Walmart's open. All these huge corporations are open. But your small business cannot open. Somebody has to explain to me why that is. Why is it that rioters and violent criminals are allowed to maraud on the streets in bunches, together, often not wearing masks, touching each other, not social distancing? That's fine. Does this virus know that that's a rioter? Oh, we're not going to go to the riots. We're not going to go to these mass demonstrations and pull down statues. We're not going to affect those people. But we will go to small businesses. Think of how absurd this all is. And I hope it's making you angry, because you ought to be angry. And you ought to understand that your rights are being trampled right now. Okay? I want to give you guys an update. I usually give these numbers out every time I do a video on COVID. So here's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to tell you how much of our population has been affected. Okay? If you watch the newscast, if you read the newspapers, you would think that 10 to 20% of our country, to 30% maybe, of our country has been infected, and that millions and millions of people have died. That's just not the case. The U.S. infection rate, how many people have been infected with COVID-19? Or, I'm sorry, SARS-CoV-2, which causes supposed COVID-19. Okay, so the United States has a population of 330 million people. The infection rate is 4 million right now, August 6, 2020. 4,973,568. Out of 330 million people, that's an infection rate of, listen to this, 1.48%. Okay, a little under 1.5% of our population has been affected. That means 98.5% of our population has not been affected. 98.5% of our population has not been affected. Is there anything else I could say that would convince you that this is a hoax? It's a tiny, tiny fragment of our population. What is the death rate? The death rate for people with COVID people who have died from supposedly COVID-19. Disease is 161,358 out of 330 million people. The death rate is, listen to this, 0.048%. 0.048%. That's a tiny, tiny number. And yet, here we are, panicked every night on the news, no matter where you turn. Epidemic, pandemic, fear, fear, be afraid, be afraid. Why is this? Because when you're afraid, you can be controlled. In the world, we have 8,500,000,000 people. The number of cases, the number of deaths, I should say, in the world is 711,000 deaths out of 8,500,000,000. The death rate for the world, it's got to be frightening, right? It's got to be 4%, 5%, right? Maybe 10% of the world has died from this COVID disease. No. The world death rate is 0.0089%. Nowhere near a tenth of the percent of the world. It's a tiny, tiny number. Yet look at the fear-mongering that's going on in the media. And then you can know that this is not about your health, that this is purely about control and power and destroying our nation. From 1999 to 2017, 399,000 people died from drug overdoses that involved prescription and illicit opioids. In 2017 alone, there were 70,237 recorded drug overdoses. And of those deaths, 47,000 involved an opioid. Currently, an estimated 130,000 people die every day in the United States. 130 people die every day. 130 people die every day in the United States from an opioid-related drug overdose. Now think about that. How much do you hear CNN talking about that, or MSNBC, or ABC, or CBS, or NBC? How much do you hear them talking about the 130 people that die every day in the United States from an opioid-related drug overdose? You don't hear about it. In 2019, get this, listen closely, 1.5 million people died of tuberculosis. In 2019, 1.5 million people died of tuberculosis. 1.8 billion were infected around the world. 1.8 billion were affected around the world. Not one word from the CDC, from the WHO, from the media, or any politician. Didn't hear from Anthony Fauci. Didn't hear from Deborah Birx. Didn't hear from, well, I don't know if Bill Gates has a vaccine for that. But who knows? I didn't hear from him. Think about that. 1.5 million people died of tuberculosis. Not a word. Do you really think that this event is about your health? Do you really think that people are concerned about your health? I don't. Over a 2-year period, close to $800 million worth of fentanyl pills were illegally sold online to the U.S. by Chinese distributors. $800 million worth of fentanyl pills. Fentanyl kills people. They were illegally sold online in the U.S. by Chinese distributors. According to Assistant U.S. Attorney Matt Cronin, he says this: "It is a fact that the People's Republic of China is the source of the vast majority of synthetic opioids that are flooding the streets of the United States and Western democracies. It is a fact that these synthetic opioids are responsible for the overwhelming increase in overdose deaths in the U.S. It is a fact that if the People's Republic of China wanted to shut down the synthetic opioids industry, they could do so in a day." Why is it that you never hear anything about this on the news? I find this very odd. Now, let's get to the coronavirus deaths. I reported the death rate and how many people have died in this country. But a lot of these deaths and these reports are fake. I'm I'm going to read you a statement from the death certificates, CDC statement for death certificates. This is from the Centers for Disease Control. Coronavirus disease deaths are identified using the ICD-10 code U07.1. Deaths are coded to U07.1 when coronavirus disease 2019 or COVID-19 are reported as a cause that, listen, contributed to death on the death certificate. These can include laboratory confirmed cases as well as cases without laboratory confirmation. Again, this can include cases without laboratory confirmation. If the certifier suspects COVID-19 or determines it was likely, they can report COVID-19 as probable or presumed on the death certificate. So there's the Centers for Disease Control flat out telling you that you can guess or presume a COVID death. Now, if you have a political agenda and you want to destroy the economy and you're working at the health department, something tells me you're going to presume a lot. You think that doesn't happen? It happens all the time. I talked about it in my last video about Scott Jensen, who is a state senator and he happens to be a doctor, and he said explicitly in many interviews that he was coached to put down COVID death where no COVID death was evident at all. Maria Bukovic as well. Dr. Bukovic said the same thing. So a lot of these deaths, the incidents of death from COVID are heightened. And even if they're heightened, it's still a tiny, tiny percentage of our populace that has been affected. We have, 600,000 deaths from cancer every year, 300,000 deaths from obesity, 647,000 people die from heart disease every year. 250 to 400,000 people die from iatrogenic causes. That's causes by doctors, by hospitals that kill people. How come you never hear a story about that? This has been going on for years and years and years, but you never hear about the epidemic from opioids, from heart disease, and from iatrogenic disease. You don't hear anything about that. Why is that? Is it really about your health? Why wouldn't these issues be addressed if it was about your health? Why wouldn't the World Health Organization have a program to stop obesity? Why wouldn't your governors and your mayors sound the alarm about obesity and heart disease? Never happens. Never happens. Why? Because they can't gain control over you like that. Okay? If you're under 60 with no comorbid conditions, this virus is less deadly than influenza. This seems to come as great news to Americans because this is not what you're being told. I would say the answer is it's very difficult to get accurate numbers. That comes from one of the doctors that you saw out in front of the court steps. There was about 12 or 13 of them. This Dr. Simone Gold's quote. You've seen the video. 17 million people have seen the video, and YouTube keeps taking it down. And most media outlets are trying to debunk this. These group of doctors that actually work with COVID patients on a daily basis and have been doing it since the beginning. These doctors are explicit in saying how masks don't work, how hydroxychloroquine is a great remedy for the symptoms of COVID and has helped and saved so many people's lives. And what does the media do? The media attacks these people. Now, I'm going to get a little bit more into hydroxychloroquine. I want to talk about masks just for a quick second. I did a whole video on that. You could go check my channel on that. It's called To Mask or Not to Mask. But very briefly, masks deplete your oxygen intake significantly. Masks force you to breathe in bodily waste. There's a condition called hypercapnia, where if you're not expelling what needs to be expelled and you're breathing it in, it can cause a lot of serious symptoms. There's also hypoxia, which is a lack of oxygen in the bloodstream. Breathing is essential. To cover your mouth or cover your nose, it could be deadly. So covering your mouth a little bit is not good for you. It's going to make you sick. And I say if masks work, everybody should wear one. They don't work because a virus is incredibly small, 0.03 microns. It goes through a mask like water through a screen door. It doesn't stop viruses from going in, but it does make you breathe in your own bodily wastes. If masks work, then why isn't every business and every school opened up? Just have people wear masks. No, you don't want to do that. If masks work, keep prisoners in jail with masks on. Right? If they don't work, stop insisting that the public wears them, one or the other. But no, you have hypocrisy. Glaring hypocrisy. Okay? I read a whole bunch of studies on masks. I'll read you some quotes from doctors. This is from a guy named J.L. Jacobs. He said, use of surgical face masks to reduce the incidence of the common cold among health workers in Japan. A randomized controlled trial found that masks do not work. N95 masked healthcare workers were significantly more likely to experience headaches. Face masks used in HCW healthcare workers has not demonstrated to provide benefit in terms of cold symptoms or getting colds. Face masks to prevent transmission of influenza virus. A systemic review found that absolutely they did not work. They did not stop infection. The use of masks and respirators to prevent transmission of influenza as a systemic review of the scientific evidence. Here's the quote: there were 17 eligible studies. None of the studies established a conclusive relationship between mask respirator use and protection against influenza infection. Okay, now let's talk about the testing real quick. First of all, they claim that they've isolated the virus. I don't believe that's the case. I know that they're using PCR testing, which is just astounding to me. Polymerase chain reaction tests, they don't work. Kary Mullis, the man who invented it, said this, and I quote, although there is a common misimpression that the viral load tests actually count the number of viruses in the blood, these tests, PCR tests, cannot detect free infectious viruses at all. They are not to be used. PCR tests are not to be used. This is the man who invented PCR testing. He said they are not to be used to detect a virus. Now, if somebody told you, I used this analogy in my last video, that an automobile was meant to be driven on the ground, solely on the ground, how many of you would get in the automobile and drive it off a cliff in hopes to fly it? You wouldn't do that. That's not what it's for. PCR tests are not to be used to detect virus. Plain and simple. It's just a joke that they're using this. And they're also using antibody tests, which are extremely, extremely inaccurate. Saying that antibodies are specific to SARS-CoV-2. That's just not true. I guarantee you're going to find 50 or 60 different reasons why you could show up antibody positive. And there's been a lot of media coverage showing precisely just this, that the tests don't work, and that there's really no gold standard for the test. So if I were you, I wouldn't get tested. But the thing is, the more people get tested, the more the death rate goes down, and the less deadly the virus looks like. I believe all of this is a farce. I don't believe viruses cause disease at all. And you could prove that for yourself. You'll see that in my other videos. Lockdowns. There's zero evidence that lockdowns work. A huge portion of those who test positive have been locked in their homes. Figure that out. Suicide hotline calls are up 600% across the country. A sharp rise in Zoloft and other drugs that are used to combat depression. There are a lot of homes that are not safe for kids, and these kids are forced to deal with awful situations for the entire day instead of being able to go out and play, to stay at other people's homes. It's horrible. Remember, quarantine is for those who are sick. Quarantine is not for healthy people. A slow erosion of our rights should be frightening to any citizen. Obvious theft of our most basic rights should have us up in arms. Unfortunately, most Americans sit there and wait for their next orders from elected officials and unelected officials who have nothing but ulterior motives. Be alarmed and resolute. Fight back and insist on your rights before you don't have any. If you don't exercise a muscle, it becomes flaccid and weak. It's the same with your rights. How long will it be before they stop you from going to work or taking a vacation or being stopped at state lines, at movie theaters, at restaurants, sporting events, going to school, and insisting that you take a test that is completely inaccurate, unscientific, and absolutely random? All of these test givers and their autocrat bosses now have your life in their hands once you test positive. In less than 4 months, the UN, World Health Organization, the CDC, world government, and our media got our entire populace completely controlled. They turned us into a socialist-run country. In lockstep, most American citizens have been fooled into wearing masks, voluntarily destroying their own businesses, murdering their parents in nursing homes and hospitals, denying them proper burials and memorial services. They have gained more control over schooling your kids, are forcing you to use credit cards because they say cash is dirty, and supposedly there's a coin shortage. The government dictates what events are acceptable. Violent, murderous, incendiary protests are good, apparently. That's okay, and the virus won't spread. Going to church, running your business, working out, or playing a ball game is now a criminal activity. Why have no government employees lost their jobs? If this is all about your safety and all about your health, these things don't make any sense. All of this, by the way, with zero scientific evidence. There's no evidence that SARS-CoV-2 is the cause of any disease, let alone death. Okay? The cacophony of network choirs repeat parrot-like phrases like COVID pandemic, social distance, shelter in place, the new normal ad nauseum. There is nothing normal about any of this. They say we are quarantined again, yet quarantine is for those who are sick. This is a form of imprisonment. People's lives are being destroyed, and once thriving businesses are closing, we are being forced literally to limit our oxygen intake, to breathe our own bodily waste. We cannot visit our loved ones and our parents, and they're left to die in hospitals alone and nursing homes. Our children are missing out on irretrievable experiences on the playing fields, in the classroom, and school auditoriums. They are being robbed of experiences that are essential as any social distancing. The fact is that that is outright antisocial behavior. Sorry about that. I'm getting a little tired. Social distancing is completely antisocial. Kristi Noem of South Dakota has a death rate 11 times lower than New York State. There were no lockdowns in her state of South Dakota. None. 11 times lower than New York. Sweden did not lock down their people. That's a whole country. Here are the results. Sweden has a population of 10,343,403 people. Out of that 10 million people, there were 81,967 cases of COVID-19 out of 10,343,403 people. That is a percentage of 0.79%. In Sweden, there were only 5,766 deaths out of a population of 10,343,403 people. The death rate in Sweden, who did not lock down, where most people are not wearing masks, I mean like 2 or 3% of the population looks to be wearing masks from what I've seen. the death rate is 0.055%. Lockdowns do not work, okay? But CBS, for some reason, CBS News recently had on the Minneapolis Federal Reserve Bank president saying how lockdowns were going to be the solution to the problem. It's curious that CBS would bring on a guest from the Federal Reserve Bank. Is he an expert at epidemiology? Is he a health expert? No. Find it odd. Anyway, just want to remind everybody that any kind of solution to these problems, the media immediately attacks. The doctors in lab coats that I mentioned earlier, Dr. Hamilton, Dr. Emanuel, Dr. Erickson, all of these people came out and said, this is nothing. We treat our patients with zinc and hydroxychloroquine and a few other mixtures here and there, and they get well, invariably. And immediately they're attacked. They lose their job. They are disparaged by every media outlet on the planet. Hydroxychloroquine is a 65-year-old medication that has been on the World Health Organization's safe and essential list of medications for years. It's over-the-counter in many countries. In fact, it's sold over-the-counter in Indonesia and in Iran. Many states have empowered their pharmacists now to not honor physicians' prescriptions. That has never happened before. That interferes with the doctor-patient relationship. Can you imagine? There are states now, there are governors that have told pharmacists, do not give this drug to people, despite the fact that it has been proven safe and extremely effective. And doctors who are literally treating people and saying, yes, this works, yes, this works. And people who have taken it says, yes, this works. These governors are saying you can't have this drug. I don't know what that sounds like to you, but that sounds like some form of murder. Dr. Emanuel said, and I quote, I see over 15 to 20, sometimes 20, 15, 10 patients a day. I use a surgical mask. I have not been infected. Nobody I know has been infected that's around me. So this is the answer to this question. You want to open schools, everybody get on hydroxychloroquine. That is the prevention for COVID. One tablet every other week is good enough. And that is what we need to get across to the American people. There's prevention and there is cure. We don't have to lock down schools. We don't have to lock down our businesses. There is prevention and there is a cure. So instead of talking about a mask, instead of talking about lockdowns, instead of talking about all these things, put our teachers on hydroxychloroquine. And of course, immediately, she's attacked. So that's it for today, folks. That's my update on the COVID-19 event. I want to remind you all that you are an American citizen, that your governors, your mayors, your city councilmen, they work for you. I would insist on your constitutional rights. I would insist on knowing what's in the Constitution. I would insist on knowing what this country is founded on. I would insist on knowing who these people are in the streets and what their aim is. And I would insist on educating myself and questioning everything. Again, you don't have to take my word for anything. Find out for yourself. I hope this information was useful to you. I appreciate you watching. Please share this video with your friends. Please leave a comment. I always like to hear what you have to say. If you have any questions, that's wonderful. If anybody wants to come on and debate me, I would love to do that. I'm always open for a good debate. I think debate is extremely useful. And here, obviously on my channel, there's no censorship whatsoever. Censorship is rampant throughout social media and throughout the media. If you're not aware of that, I can't really help you. Anyway, question everything, verify everything. Remember that you have a mind of your own. Think for yourself. None of this makes any sense. Remember, healthy acts always produce health. I'm Matthew Grace. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon. Have a great day. Keep fighting the good fight, people. It's worth it.